From nothing to almost everything. How Trump rebuilt his political image. It's curious how the world loves to see someone fall, but loves it even more when that person refuses to stay down. Donald Trump was the man the entire planet canceled, and somehow the same man who managed to turn that cancellation into a stage. Some call him a genius, others crazy. But the fact is, no one emerges unscathed from hearing his name. And perhaps that's precisely where the secret lies. He learned to use hate as fuel and discredit as a ladder. While most people strive to appear perfect, Trump did the opposite. He showed himself to be flawed, controversial, and all too human. And this, oddly enough, is what made him unbeatable. Because the public doesn't follow unattainable heroes. They follow those who bleed in public and still smile. With each scandal, he grew. With each criticism, he made headlines. And when they said he was finished, he was just beginning. It's the kind of paradox that confounds experts but delights strategists. This is the portrait of a man who defied all the rules of modern communication and won precisely by breaking them. The story of someone who lost everything, except control over his own narrative. And that's what we're going to talk about. The power to rebuild an image when the whole world considers you defeated. Get ready, because what comes next could change the way you view influence, reputation, and even the concept of failure. If this content made you think, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue learning about the behind the scenes of power, influence, and the human mind. Because understanding the world is the first step to learning how to lead it. The man nobody took seriously. There was a time when Donald Trump was seen as nothing more than a walking caricature, an eccentric millionaire who spoke too loudly, gesticulated too much, and promised the impossible. The media treated him as entertainment, not a threat. He was the kind of figure everyone talked about, but no one truly believed he could lead a nation. Yet behind the spotlight and flamboyant appearance, there was a strategist watching every reaction, testing limits, and learning the game of attention, something few understood in time. Trump understood early on that, in a world saturated with information, the loudest shouter is heard first. And he shouted, with style. He turned mockery into a platform, criticism into free publicity, and disbelief into fuel. While the political elite underestimated his speeches, the general public saw in him someone who spoke the language of the streets. He was the anti-politician who dared to say what many thought but lacked the courage to express. The secret was to appear chaotic but act with surgical precision. When everyone laughed, he counted votes. When they ridiculed him, he studied trends. And when they said his candidacy was just a joke, he used every headline as part of a larger plan, a game of perception where discrediting was just the first step toward conquest. Perhaps what few realized is that, in politics, being underestimated is a strategic advantage. And that was precisely where the silent turnaround that would change the course of history began. Chaos as a strategy. When chaos became routine, many thought Trump was paving the way for his own downfall. His statements felt like shooting himself in the foot, his tweets like aimless explosions. But there was method to the madness. He understood something few politicians have. In times of saturation, those who dominate the chaos dominate the narrative. Every controversial phrase, every incendiary speech, every break with the political norm created a new cycle of attention. And attention, in the 21st century, is the new currency of power. Trump didn't seek to be loved, he sought to be remembered. While his opponents sought to appear perfect, he appeared human, impulsive, imperfect, and therefore more real. This raw authenticity generated a kind of visceral identification. Ordinary people saw in him someone who didn't mince words, who reacted without filter, and this, paradoxically, made him trustworthy. It's the same principle used by great communicators. A well-used error is more powerful than distant perfection. The chaos that seemed out of control was actually the stage set for everyone to look in his direction. A clear example? While the world discussed his tweets, he negotiated alliances, revised agreements, and rearranged pieces on the global chessboard. The noise was a distraction, the scandal a smokescreen, and without realizing it, this horror show was setting the stage for something much bigger. The construction of the myth. While most people were trying to understand what made him so resistant to criticism, Trump had already discovered the formula for political immortality, transforming himself into a myth. He ceased to be just a man and became an idea, the idea of resistance, against a corrupt and elitist system. It was us against them, the people against the powers that be. This narrative, masterfully repeated on social media, made him not just a politician, but a symbol, an icon of opposition who survived cancellation, headlines, and even defeat. The power of a myth lies not in its perfection, but in its narrative, and Trump knew how to tell his own story better than any journalist could. He positioned himself as the betrayed warrior, the wronged outsider, the man fighting alone against the empire. In every speech, he reinforced this archetype of the modern hero. This is the same logic that drives films, religions, and social movements. When people believe someone is fighting for them, that person gains an almost spiritual power. Over time, Trump ceased to be a name and became an emblem, something that transcended the individual and became a collective belief. It was no longer just about politics, but about identity. And that's where the story shifts. Because when someone succeeds in transforming their own image into myth, the next natural step is redemption. The return of the one who was hunted, but never defeated. The triumphant return. When all seemed lost, Trump did what few would dare. He turned his exile into a stage. Banned from social media, surrounded by lawsuits, and ridiculed by the press, he used strategic silence as a weapon. While the political world celebrated his definitive downfall, he reorganized his pieces, studied his flaws, and waited for the right moment to reappear. And when he returned stronger, not because he reinvented himself, but because he used his own failure as a narrative of victory. This is the essence of the return of the great. They return not as they were, but as symbols of resistance. Trump's return was marked by something that transcends politics, a survival instinct amplified by public perception. The man who lost the White House gained something even more powerful, the myth of injustice. Each lawsuit became proof of persecution. Each criticism became evidence that he annoyed the system. It was the return of a character who never left the scene, only changed the setting. And deep down, this touches the collective unconscious. Everyone loves to see the rejected come back on top. Trump's political resurrection showed that, in a world of instant cancellations, those who understand the right time to retreat also understand the power of returning. His new rise wasn't just political, it was symbolic. He returned as if to say, "You tried to erase me, but you ended up shining a light on me." And in that moment it became clear. The story wouldn't end there, because the legend now needed to teach what he learned in the fire of rejection. The lesson behind the strategy. Behind all the controversy, the fiery speeches, and the bold strategies, lies a lesson that transcends politics: the ability to rebuild in the face of a fall. Trump, with all his excesses and controversies, has shown that reputation isn't static. It's an asset that can be reshaped, repositioned, and, if necessary, completely reinvented. And this applies to anyone who hasn't been discredited, who hasn't had their image tarnished by a mistake or a misunderstanding. The difference lies in who chooses to hide and who decides to use criticism as fuel. In times of volatile public opinion, survival is an art, and the main tool of this art is communication. Trump didn't just talk, he told stories. He created plots that sparked emotion, divided opinions, and kept him at the center of the conversation. It's the same principle that can transform a brand, a professional, or even an ordinary person looking to start over. After all, those who master their own narrative master how the world sees them. And that's worth more than any title. The great lesson is simple, yet powerful. You can fall, be ridiculed, canceled, erased from social media. But as long as there's coherence between what you believe and what you communicate, there's always room to start over. Trump's strategy teaches at its core something profoundly human, that it's not power that rebuilds a person, but the courage to keep showing up when the whole world would rather they disappear. And that's where the game truly begins. Ultimately, Trump's journey is less about politics and more about resilience. It's about understanding that even when the world tries to erase your name, you can still write your own story. What he did, consciously or not, was prove that other people's opinions don't define your destiny. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. No one has the right to close a chapter that hasn't finished yet. Only you can decide when it's time to begin again. Now think about it. How many times have you been underestimated? How many times have you been told you couldn't come back? And yet, here you are, reading this, ready to turn things around. Perhaps the secret lies in using setbacks as rehearsals for victory, in turning rejection into a stage, and in never forgetting that even chaos can be a strategy if you know how to handle it intelligently. So tell me, what will you do with the power of your own narrative? Will you leave it in the hands of others, or will you start rewriting your story now? If this content made you think, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue learning about the behind the scenes of power, influence, and the human mind. Because understanding the world is the first step to learning to lead it.